It's Mark and Pete.
Hello, and welcome to the show. More colourful conversations with Mark and Pete. This is the show dedicated to religion, politics, and business. Each week, we take a key theme, and we ask on this particular episode a very important question. Are we ignorant fools? Well, what do we mean by this? Well, the UK government recently announced that a Kent grammar school is being allowed to build an annex in another town. Well, in actual fact, this raises an awful lot of controversy because it's actually illegal to build new grammar schools. Well, it appears that Weald of Kent School in Tunbridge will open on a site in Sevenoaks in September 2017. And this will accommodate around 450 girls, which actually is something that a lot of people are disagreeing with. But it also raises the wider issue about the principle of education, how we learn, and our understanding of society. So although we go to school, we do learn a great deal. But do we ever really learn enough? Are we always just wandering around society as ignorant fools? Well, the one thing I do know is that I'm with clergyman Pete. So, Pete, I want your opinion. Do you agree with the principles of building an annex and a grammar school? And do you think that we ever really learn in life?
Without commenting on the particular case of this particular annex, whether it's going to be well run or whatever, the idea of building another grammar school, annex or not, is a good one. I think I do think that grammar schools, which for those for whom this is an unknown term, the grammar school is a school in which you select by ability people to enter. So it's a public school, but entry includes a selection by ability. So the people who go there will have a certain academic standard, and therefore they can compete against each other. They'll be in amongst a certain milieu where people can talk at the right level and discuss their work with each other. So it's a way of learning amongst your contemporaries who are of a good enough standard such that you can learn together well. So I think it is a good idea. And I think that ideas of education in which everyone is lumped together have resulted in teaching methods being aimed at the centre mainly. So yes. Median ability. And that has meant that people at the low end have needed to have teachers brought in, specialist teachers brought into the classroom, even when the whole class has a variety of children. There's someone coming in to support low ability children with special needs, which a special need technically shouldn't just be that you're low intelligence. But it can be that, but it has to have something else. But that's in practice what has happened. However, people of the high end of ability miss out, even though you can be, requests can be statemented, can be tested to say, this person has a special need because they need extra work because they're so intelligent. In practice, no extra help is given. The better way to do it is just to organise the schooling differently, so that people who are of that higher ability are able to work in a school separately so that they can achieve a higher level. Yes. I don't see a problem with that. I think it's one good way of, not the only way, but one good way of organising schooling. So I think that is a good one. There's a good way of organising a school, so I'm all for grammar schools. As to whether the other part of your question was, what is it that we do about learning throughout life? Do we, in fact,
Correct.
Go on learning? And the idea that we only learn during early years became very popular, and the development of schooling methods was based on it. Now, when I studied educational theory back when I was an undergraduate, Piaget's model of education was very popular, in which his research done back in the 19th century, excuse me, was looking at how people developed in their learning ability over years. And this ability to learn new things appeared to disappear, or at least lower considerably, once they got past school age. But what he didn't take into account was the fact that the people who went past school age were not consciously learning. They weren't trying to educate themselves. In other words, they weren't developing in the same way as school children because they didn't go to school anymore. It was cause and effect. He wasn't testing people. There wasn't a control. He wasn't testing people fairly. There wasn't a control of people who never went to school or people who stayed in education into later years. Yeah. And so this theory is now being really fundamentally reappraised to say, well, no, we not only do we need to learn throughout our lives, but we can learn throughout our lives, including in academic subjects.
Yes. Well, I think that the reason that this particular topic that we're debating is so controversial comes on two levels. So the first part about the grammar school. So for those international listeners, the idea of the grammar school, particularly in the United Kingdom, the original purpose of a medieval grammar school was actually to learn Latin. And essentially that curriculum was then broadened over a period of time throughout the United Kingdom. So it expanded to other topics like science and mathematics, history, geography, and so on. And as the centuries progressed, the idea was that essentially teachers would teach a broad curriculum, and pupils would then have the ability to be more equipped to go into society. But then, of course, the other side of it is, as you've already highlighted, which is in business, one of the things today that's very significantly recognized is you have to keep training. Science moves on, technology moves on. And of course, if you remain static, then it's inevitable that you possibly won't be as competitive. So I'm just going to raise a point just to sort of highlight about the importance of knowledge. And this is a little poem which is called Scire Quod Sciendum, knowledge which is worth having. The wells of wisdom have lost their supply, and the font of all knowledge has now run dry. Is it just a leak in the closet of the teaching types, or bust from a burst of political gripes? The government is expanding our grammar schools, leaving all of the others to look like fools. The climate is barren and we're all dehydrated, leaving millions of minds badly educated. The world is also awash with mindless media, dumbing our know-how reliant on Wikipedia. So the proverbial font no longer springs eternal, evaporated to a life that's dim and infernal. As the gasping youth needs a jolly good drenching, does your thirst for wisdom now need quenching?
Yes, well, I think that the thirst for learning just needs to carry on throughout life because things change. And the way that we operate, certainly in places of work, has changed a lot over recent years and is looking to go on changing with technological developments. So we need to learn them. We need to keep on learning. But that's not a bad thing.
No, but I think that one point I want to mention about the grammar school, because you think it's a good thing, and I do in one sense, but I want to also sort of talk on the behalf of other people who perhaps have an issue here, because one of the criticisms with grammar schools is it provides opportunity for possibly people to gain better education, because in some cases, but not in all, schools are actually grammar schools that you do actually pay, others you don't. But the point is, it's about, are we creating, say, for example, an elitist society that essentially, as the poem alluded to, sort of with tongue in cheek, that actually those who go to a grammar school are going to be better equipped, and it just leaves the others looking like fools. Well, I don't know whether that's really the case. And is there any evidence to say that if you go to a grammar school, you're actually better off going into business and into society? Some people may say they've got an advantage. And is that the point that, not everyone is going to be at the top of the academic tree when it comes to coming through schooling? And yet, if we continue to learn, i.e. break this cycle of perhaps the perception that we might be ignorant fools if we can't be academically brilliant, there are many examples where entrepreneurs have done very well after school.
Yes.
So they're not academic. They may not have a certificate to their name, but it does show that they have a very good skill about understanding business, growing an operation, and actually earning a lot of money, not just for themselves, but for communities, whether they're in the United Kingdom or internationally. And so I think that the point that we've got to explore here is, does having a grammar school system create an elitist society? That's the first point. And does that mean that those who don't go to a grammar school can't learn as well?
Well, does it, let me have a go at answering that question. Does having a grammar school system create an elitist society? No, I don't think so. I think that the view of grammar schools, that they are somehow better and for better people, comes from an already elitist society or a snobbish society. The creation of the grammar schools that we now know, I didn't know that thing about the medieval equivalent grammar schools when they first started. I guess that explains the name. They're being taught grammar, hence grammar schools. I didn't know that, but I do know that the grammar schools set up during the 20th century were ones that were set up in conjunction with what were called secondary modern schools.
Yes.
And the secondary modern schools gave a non-academic education, or at least that was the intention. So they would train people for more practical jobs. An academic education at the grammar school trained people to go then onto university and to go perhaps for more managerial, perhaps research scientist jobs, or perhaps into the civil service, that sort of thing. So there was some thought in it of different types of education, not saying that one was better than the other, but rather specializing. Now, when I talked about earlier about people being more intelligent, well, we're talking about just measuring people's abilities to think in an academic way, that sort of intelligence. You could measure intelligence differently. We could say, well, what about a practical intelligence, which is very different? You know, the ability to do mechanics, as in practical mechanics on a car, is very different from someone who is able to design a car. They're very different skills and different ways of thinking. So there's nothing wrong, I would say, in having different schools for those different situations. However, I would say we need to go towards taking it a step further than that. And that is to say, for many people, they don't need to go to school. They shouldn't be in secondary education at all. I think primary education is very, very important, that you get the basics hammered into you, that you learn how to read and to write and to do basic maths. But that you then go on to study further is often detrimental and pretty much always extremely boring for those guys. Yeah. So you're going to a place that you don't want to go, being taught by people who don't want to teach you, and it's just a tedious thing where you could be earning money. So I would lower the age at which people can work, and I would say that people don't have to go to school.
Yes. Well, I want to mention something here which is really important about in business, because I've seen mistakes being made by very senior managers of international organizations who make the one classic mistake when selecting what they perceive to be the best candidates. Often when they look through the resumes, or we would call them curriculum vitae, CVs, that they often judge a candidate based upon their schooling academics and their qualifications. And yes, that is certainly a milestone in their journey of learning, but isn't actually necessarily a reflection of where they are today. So, for example, if you've got somebody with 20 years experience or more in a given industry, it's likely that, of course, they would have learned a great deal. Well, actually, that would be the case. And yet, strangely enough, often candidates are excluded because they may not have a specific degree or O-levels or advanced A-levels during, say, a period that was 20 years ago. And it's quite extraordinary how many candidates can actually be excluded as a result of just simply what I'll call ignorance, because people haven't really taken a wider look at a candidate. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I go back to the other part of learning, and I just want to sort of get another perspective on this, because originally about the grammar schools, about the learning of particularly Latin, etc. But one of the first was Winchester College, but it was one of the first independent of the church, which is quite interesting. So what does the Bible say about learning?
Well, it's interesting that you point that out, that was one of the first independent of the church. The fact is that pretty much all education was through the church, and certainly all primary education that was done outside the home. By primary, we mean younger, so up to the age of 11. Primary education was done through the church, and the reason for that is quite simply the Bible talks a lot about education. It isn't always translated as the word education. It's translated as instruction, as discipling, as teaching, as in teaching the word, or teaching the commandments, or teaching the ways of God. But it has a lot to say about it, and all those things are, of course, education. And the Bible, the famous verse in the Bible that's used to talk about teaching young people is from Proverbs 22, verse 6, which is often translated like this: "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." And that's brilliant, and I would use it to support my point about it's important to have children educated, except for it doesn't actually say that, in that one of the words is translated wrongly. I don't know where this traditional translation came from, but actually the word isn't child, it's youth.
Yes.
It says give instruction or discipline a youth. Excuse me. Discipline a youth, a young man about the way, about his way, about the way he's living. When he's old, he won't turn from it. It's telling you that you need to have proper training. And it wasn't talking about children, it's talking about older, so we would say secondary education is in view here. And he needs to have proper discipline so that he will know how to live when he's older. And this, so teaching, discipline, education is vitally important. The Bible has a lot more to say about it, about the importance of knowledge and wisdom. And we were saying, well, are we going to remain ignorant fools? Well, ignorance is lack of knowledge. And so we could say that we can do something about that by gaining more knowledge, but we never have all the knowledge. Things change. There are always things that we don't know. So we need to go on gaining knowledge, even when we have left school. But what schools can help us do is help us to use that knowledge. Wisdom is important, the wise use of knowledge. In the Bible, it talks about this many times. In Psalm 119, verse 66, it talks about knowledge, but then the wise use of that knowledge. It says, "Teach me good judgment and knowledge, for I believe in your commandments." That God will teach them how to use the knowledge that they have. And that's what we need to learn. That's a very important part of schooling. But that can also be an important part of how we operate throughout our lives, to make sure that we have the way of thinking that we assess the knowledge that we have and use it wisely. We can not do anything about remaining ignorant. We'll always have a lack of knowledge, a knowledge deficit, because there's too much knowledge. We might have to remain ignorant, but we don't have to remain fools.
No, exactly, and that's a good point. So that's a good way to sort of end the show. I would like to sort of call out to our listeners and sort of invite them to let us know what they think on this subject. Clearly, there are many people who will have children who are going through education, or even if you already well past that stage and you're already learning and maybe on a training scheme at work. Is that something that you see as being important? Do you want more? Why not let us know? Log on to www.markandpete.com and you can fill out the contact form and let us know. So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.